Why your mind is lying to you. Kant's philosophical warning. The last time someone genuinely hurt you, are you certain you know what actually happened? Not what you felt, not what it meant, what actually happened. Because there is a very specific difference between those two things. And the uncomfortable truth is that most people have never paused long enough to notice where one ends and the other begins. Your mind told you a story, and somewhere between the event and the meaning, it stopped reporting and started writing. And the strangest part, it didn't feel like a story. It felt like reality. Think about how it happens. A message that takes too long to arrive, a tone of voice that shifts almost imperceptibly, a silence that lands wrong. And before you've finished processing what happened, you already know what it means. Not suspect, not wonder. No, they don't care. They're pulling away. This is who they actually are. The certainty you feel in that moment is not evidence that you're right. It is evidence that your mind finished the job before you noticed it had started. You weren't perceiving, you were interpreting. And the mind didn't bother to inform you of the difference. This is what Kant spent his life trying to understand. Not as an abstract philosophical problem, as a structural feature of how every human mind operates, including his, including yours, including the most rational person you have ever met. There's a specific experience most people have had at least once. You were completely certain about something. You had the logic. You had the emotional conviction that comes when a story feels true all the way through. And then something happened that didn't fit, and in that moment you didn't feel like you had made an error. You felt like the ground had moved, like something solid had turned out to be constructed. Kant would call it the collapse of a synthesis, because what your mind had been showing you was never the raw event. It was the event plus everything your mind added to it. The interpretation sewn so tightly into the perception that you couldn't feel the seam, and you believed the seam wasn't there. Most people assume the mind's job is to receive information. The eye sees, the ear hears, the brain processes. At the end of that chain there is knowledge, something reliable, roughly corresponding to what actually exists. Kant destroyed that picture, quietly, methodically. He didn't say the world doesn't exist. He said something more precise and far more unsettling. The world you experience is never the world as it is. It is always the world as your mind has prepared it for you. Space, time, causality. These are not features of the world that the mind picks up. They are features of the mind itself, applied to experience before experience becomes experience. Which means the world you inhabit, with all its distances and sequences and causes, is partly something your mind constructed, not invented, not hallucinated, but organized. And the organization belongs to you, not to the thing you're looking at. This disturbed Kant enough to wake him from what he called his dogmatic slumber. If the basic structures through which people understand the world aren't coming from the world, what else is the mind adding that we haven't noticed? The answer he spent 11 years building, more than anyone had imagined. The same process that organizes raw sensation into a world of objects also organizes raw events into stories about people. Think about the last time you were absolutely certain about someone's intention, not their action. Their intention. They said something, or didn't say something. They were late. They forgot. And in the space between what happened and your response, the mind did something automatic. It assigned a cause. It found a reason. It decided what kind of person does that. And you experience that interpretation as if it were perception. Not, I think they might have meant this. More like, this is what happened. I know it. The judgment arrived already wearing the clothes of a fact. You cannot watch yourself interpret something in real time. By the time you're aware of the meaning is already there. It already feels like what you saw, like reality, rather than your version of it. Kant's term for this was synthesis. The mind stitches the flow of sensation into a world that makes sense. It does this so quickly and so thoroughly that the stitching is invisible. The seams don't show, and here's the problem with seams you can't see. You can't question what you can't find. If you're still here, you're probably someone who has spent real time thinking about why people, including yourself, end up so confidently wrong. not uncertain, confidently, completely wrong about something that felt absolutely clear. That kind of person tends to find what comes next genuinely useful. Consider subscribing. This is not the last time we'll go somewhere uncomfortable and come back with something that actually helps. Now, the antinomies. This is where Kant's project reveals a crack that runs all the way down. An antinomy is a contradiction between two conclusions that are both logically valid, both sound, simultaneously irreducibly incompatible. Kant found four. The most famous: does the universe have a beginning in time? Thesis: yes. If the universe had no beginning, an infinite amount of time would have had to pass before now. But an infinite series can never be completed. So there must have been a first moment. Antithesis: no. If the universe had a beginning, what was there before it began? Nothing. But nothing cannot produce something, so the universe cannot have had a beginning. Both arguments are valid. Both produce directly opposite conclusions. Kant wasn't describing a gap science might fill. He was describing a structural limit built into the kind of mind we have. The categories that allow us to think about time were designed for experience within the world. When we apply them to the world as a whole, the machinery produces contradictions. Because it was never built for that scale, this is more than a philosophical puzzle. It's a warning about a failure that shows up not just in cosmology, but in every conversation you have ever been completely certain about. Think about a real conflict, a genuine rupture, one that cost something. There is a version of that conflict where your behavior makes complete sense, where your responses were proportionate. That story has internal logic. The pieces fit. Now hold it next to what the other person believes, from inside their own experience of the same events. Their version has the same structure, the same internal logic. What felt to you like a fair response felt to them like an attack. What felt to them like a reasonable request felt to you like a provocation. Two incompatible stories, both consistent from within. This is the antinomy structure in ordinary life. Two minds applying their invisible organizing categories to the same events and producing irreconcilable conclusions. Not because someone is lying, because the categories are invisible, personal, and were never announced. You didn't know what yours were. They didn't know what theirs were. Both of you thought you were simply describing what happened. The lying isn't intentional. The mind isn't trying to deceive you. It's doing exactly what it was built to do, converting raw, ambiguous experience into something you can act on. The problem is that acting requires certainty, and certainty requires closing down alternatives. So the mind closes them. It picks an interpretation, fills the gaps, assigns intentions, and presents the finished product as if no alternatives were ever considered. You didn't see the selection process. You only got the conclusion. The phrase that appears in people who have done real work on this is, "I thought I knew," not "I was wrong," but "I thought I knew." Because being genuinely wrong about something important rarely feels like catching a mistake. It feels like waking up. And then, quietly, the mind starts building a new story, with the same confidence it had before. Kant spent decades trying to catch the mind in the act, to make the invisible categories visible, not to eliminate them, you cannot think without them, but to know them. There was one day he didn't take his afternoon walk, the walk so precise that neighbors set their clocks by it. He was reading Rousseau and became so absorbed he lost track of time entirely. He later wrote, "There was a time when I despised the common person who knows nothing. Rousseau corrected me." The man who built a system for examining the limits of reason stopped and found that the question he was asking, how the mind structures experience without knowing it, was the question underneath every misunderstanding anyone had ever had with someone they cared about. The mind is a telescope, and most people spend their lives looking through it without ever examining what it does to what they're looking at. The examination doesn't require philosophy. It requires one thing. Learning to notice the moment when I feel like this happened quietly becomes this happened. When I interpreted this as hostile becomes this was hostile. That transition, from feeling to fact, from interpretation to perception, is where the lying occurs, without malice, without awareness, with complete conviction. Your mind is lying to you, not because it's broken, because it's working exactly as it was designed to. The question is not how to stop it. The question is whether you are paying attention when it does. Kant spent his life on that question. He built an instrument for examining the instrument. He made the invisible categories visible, not to paralyze thinking, but to make it honest. And a gap you can see is one you can think inside of. That is not certainty. It is something better.